It happened so fast, I barely had time to blink. I walked into the glass-walled boardroom on the 48th floor thinking it was just another Monday check-in. But the moment I sat down, Evelyn Hart, the new VP with that perfect smile that never reaches her eyes, slid a thick white envelope across the table. Her voice was cold, almost rehearsed. "We no longer require your services. Effective immediately." I could feel every pair of eyes around a table on me. No explanation. No thank you for the 14 years I'd given this company. Just a final verdict, delivered like I was nothing more than a line item to be deleted. The security badge on my lanyard felt suddenly heavier. My chest tightened, but my mind was strangely calm. Because the one thing Evelyn didn't know was that she had just pulled the pin on a grenade she couldn't see. That boardroom, with its skyline view and its polished table, thought they were witnessing my last day. What they were actually seeing was the opening move in a game I'd been quietly preparing for years. In 30 seconds, my career with Pinnacle Systems had been erased. But in the same 30 seconds, their biggest mistake had been set in motion. Before I tell you what happened next, where are you listening from? And here's something I want you to think about. Have you ever been blindsided at work by someone who underestimated you? Leave a comment if this sparks a memory. Your story might just be the reminder someone out there needs today. 14 years. That's how long I'd been at Pinnacle Systems in Chicago. Not just working there, building it. I joined when we were a handful of engineers crammed into a subleased office with bad carpet and worse coffee. My role? Security architecture. My passion? Finding ways to keep our clients' systems locked tight no matter what storm came their way. That's how Beacon Protocol was born. It wasn't just software. It was a living system that adapted, learned, and most importantly, earned the trust of our clients. Over the years, Beacon became the backbone of Pinnacle's revenue. Some contracts flat out said they wouldn't renew unless I personally oversaw their account. That little detail became my quiet insurance policy. You see, years ago, during a round of tedious contract renewals, I'd worked with legal to insert a clause, Section 17B. It was buried deep, right after a bunch of boring technical definitions. Most people would have skimmed right past it. But I knew what it meant. It was my lighthouse. In a storm, a lighthouse doesn't move, doesn't panic. It just stands there guiding ships and warning them where the rocks are. Section 17B was my way of making sure if anyone tried to shove me overboard, I'd have a beam of light to find my way back and maybe, just maybe, sink the ship that pushed me. I never flaunted it. I never mentioned it to anyone who didn't need to know. And for over a decade, no one questioned why certain clients stayed so loyal or why those clients always seemed to want me in the room. Until Evelyn Hart arrived. She looked at Beacon and saw lines of code. She looked at me and saw replaceable. The thing about lighthouses, you only notice them when the weather turns bad. And Evelyn, she was about to find herself in a storm she couldn't navigate. It was 2 weeks before the boardroom ambush when I first realized Evelyn Hart had no idea what or who she was dealing with. We were in the Monday strategy meeting, the kind where coffee runs out halfway through and everyone's pretending not to glance at the clock. Evelyn was standing at the head of the table talking about streamlining processes and leveraging AI to optimize client interactions. Her slides were full of colorful charts, stock photos, and buzzwords that sounded impressive if you didn't actually know the work. Then she said it. Beacon Protocol is an outdated model. We can train a scalable AI to do the same work without depending on any single person. Her eyes flicked to me for half a second, not long enough to be obvious, but long enough for me to feel the hit land. I didn't react, not on the outside anyway. Inside, I was making a note, not of the insult I'd been called worse, but of her assumption that Beacon was just lines of code and I was just another name on payroll. What she didn't understand was that Beacon wasn't built to be a quick swap-in, swap-out tool. It was stitched together with the relationships, trust, and on-the-ground knowledge that no AI could replicate. But people like Evelyn, they don't believe in the human part of the equation. They believe in systems they can control from a distance, which means they also believe people are replaceable. And when you think someone's replaceable, you make mistakes. You underestimate the quiet moves they've been making. You overlook the quiet clauses hidden in contracts. That day, I left the meeting with a smile she didn't deserve to see, because she had just told me without realizing it exactly how she planned to remove me, and I already knew exactly how I'd respond when she did. 3 days after that Monday meeting, I was sitting in my favorite coffee shop on Wabash Avenue, nursing a cappuccino and pretending to read the news on my laptop. That's when the subject line popped up. Contract termination, effective immediately. It was from Northlake Bank, our largest client. I clicked it open, even though I already knew what it was going to say. Polite language, formal tone, and right in the middle of the second paragraph, the phrase I'd been waiting for, due to a key person change within Pinnacle Systems. I leaned back in my chair. The hiss of the espresso machine, the chatter of customers, it all faded for a moment. Because this wasn't just a random client departure. This was the first domino. Evelyn had pushed me out thinking it wouldn't matter. But Section 17B made sure it did. Northlake had every right to walk away the second I was no longer assigned to their account, and they wasted no time doing it. I took a slow sip of coffee, savoring the moment. It wasn't about revenge yet, it was about confirmation. My lighthouse was working exactly as designed. Across the street, a bus rolled by with a Pinnacle Systems ad plastered on the side, "Your security, our priority." The irony almost made me laugh out loud. My phone buzzed again. A message from an old colleague inside the company. Evelyn's panicking. She's scheduling an emergency client retention meeting. I didn't reply. There was no need. This was only the beginning. Because for every Northlake Bank, there were 2 more clients with the exact same clause in their contracts. And I knew exactly how long it would take before they reached the same conclusion. The clock had started ticking, and I was the only one who knew where it would stop. It didn't take long for the second email to arrive. This time, it was Midland Freight, another high-value client. The wording was almost identical to Northlake's, courteous, professional, and anchored around that same phrase, due to a key person change within Pinnacle Systems. I could almost hear the frustration in Evelyn's office when she read it. 2 clients gone in less than a week. The revenue loss alone was enough to make the finance team lose sleep. But it wasn't just about the money. It was about the signal it sent. Clients talk. They compare notes. And when one walks away, others start wondering if they should too. Sure enough, the third email came a few days later. Harbor West Insurance. Same clause, same reason, same exit. Inside Pinnacle, the atmosphere must have been like a leaking ship. I imagined them scrambling emergency meetings, rushed slide decks, Evelyn pacing a boardroom while the marketing team brainstormed client reassurance campaigns. One of my old colleagues texted me late at night. They're planning a series of webinars to calm the clients. Evelyn thinks a virtual Q&A will fix it. I didn't respond. I knew webinars weren't going to plug this hole. What the clients wanted was trust, and you can't rebuild that with a slideshow. Especially not when the one person they trusted most was now drinking coffee 3 blocks away, quietly watching the numbers bleed. From the outside, I was doing nothing. No public statements, no gloating, just waiting. Because the beauty of Section 17B was that it didn't need my help to work. It was already written into the fabric of those contracts. The more Evelyn pushed to streamline, the more that fabric unraveled. And the thing about a slow bleed, you can ignore it at first, but eventually you start to feel lightheaded. What Evelyn didn't know was that the real damage hadn't even begun yet. My apartment isn't much, just a small, sunlit place on the 10th floor with a view of the river if you lean out far enough. But that week, it became something else entirely. The dining table turned into my war room. Contracts, client rosters, and email chains were spread out in neat piles. Laptops lined up like sentries, each one logged into a different secure account. Sticky notes in bright colors dotted the surface like tiny flags marking battle positions. Every document I touched had a purpose. Every folder had a trail, signatures, timestamps, and digital fingerprints. Years of methodical record-keeping, the kind most people find boring, were now my most powerful weapons. I pulled up Section 17B again, reading it slowly, word by word, even though I knew it by heart. The language was airtight, no wiggle room, no interpretation that could twist it in their favor. I wasn't thinking about revenge, not exactly. This was about preservation, about protecting the work I'd poured myself into for over a decade. Beacon wasn't just code, it was my name, my relationships, my late nights solving impossible problems. I worked in silence, only pausing to sip coffee or jot down a note. Outside, the city hummed like nothing was happening. Inside, I was aligning every piece so that when the time came, they'd fall perfectly into place. The more I reviewed, the clearer it became they had already crossed a line. I had proof they were still running Beacon on client systems without a valid license. The logs didn't lie. I slid that folder to the center of the table and just looked at it for a moment. This wasn't about if anymore. It was about when. And judging by the messages I was still getting from inside Pinnacle, when was going to arrive a lot sooner than anyone expected. It was a Thursday afternoon when my phone lit up with a number I hadn't seen in months, the direct line to Pinnacle's CEO, Marcus Dalton. For a second, I just stared at it, letting it ring twice before picking up. "This is Lena." His voice came through tight, clipped, but with an edge I recognized instantly. Desperation. "Lena, we need to talk. We need you back immediately." I let the silence stretch, long enough for him to hear the background noise of my coffee grinder, long enough for him to wonder if I was going to hang up. "Back for what, Marcus?" I asked, calm, almost curious. "The client situation is escalating," he said. "They're walking away faster than we can respond. Evelyn's ideas aren't landing. He stopped himself, as if saying her name would make things worse. I could almost picture the scene in his office. Papers scattered, his tie loosened, the tension in his jaw. Marcus wasn't the type to admit he'd made a mistake, but I could hear it between every word. "If this is about clients tied to my contracts," I said slowly, "you might want to revisit Section 17B before we talk terms." There was a pause, a long one. "I'm not familiar with that section," he admitted. "Then here's my condition," I replied. "We'll have this conversation again, but next time your counsel is in the room and we read it together." Another pause, this one heavier. "Fine," he said at last. "Tomorrow, 9 a.m., boardroom. And Marcus," I added just before hanging up, "bring the full contract. Don't skip any pages." When I put the phone down, I wasn't smiling. Not yet. Because tomorrow, the game would leave my apartment and move back into their building. And for the first time, they'd have to sit across from me knowing they were already losing. The next morning, I walked into the Pinnacle boardroom like I'd never left. The skylines stretched out behind the floor-to-ceiling windows, but all eyes were on the thick binder sitting in the middle of the table. Marcus was there, looking like he hadn't slept. Evelyn sat 2 seats down, arms crossed so tightly it looked painful. At the far end, their corporate counsel, a sharp-suited man with silver hair, flipped through the contract. I didn't sit until he found the page. "Section 17B," I said, sliding my own marked copy forward. He began reading aloud, his voice steady at first. "In the event of a key person change, the client shall have the immediate right to terminate the agreement without penalty." Evelyn shifted in her seat. Marcus didn't move. The lawyer's tone slowed as he went on, "Furthermore, should the company, after such termination, continue to utilize the proprietary system without a valid license agreement," his eyes flicked up to me, then back to the page, This shall constitute willful infringement, subject to damages equal to 3 times the trailing 12-month revenue from the account, plus all associated legal fees. The room went silent except for the faint hum of the HVAC. The lawyer cleared his throat, then almost reluctantly read it again. Slower. This time, each number and legal term landed heavier. Evelyn's jaw tightened. Marcus leaned forward, elbows on the table, eyes on the binder, like it might suddenly change its wording if he stared long enough. I didn't say a word. This wasn't my moment to explain it. It was my moment to let the contract speak for itself. By the time the lawyer finished the second read, no one was pretending this was a misunderstanding. They understood exactly what it meant. And they also understood what it could cost. Perhaps, I said, finally breaking the silence, we should move on to the part about evidence. The lawyer looked up sharply. Evelyn's pen, which had been tapping against her notebook, froze mid-air. I reached into my bag and pulled out a slim, dark folder. No corporate logo, no label, just a neat stack of printed pages inside. Without a word, I slid it across the table to the lawyer. "Access logs," I said simply. He opened the folder, scanning the first page. His eyes moved quickly at first, then slowed. I watched his lips tighten, his brow furrow as he flipped to the second page. "These are timestamps from after your termination," he murmured. "Exactly," I replied. "Logins from Pinnacle servers using Beacon protocol on active client systems. No license, no authorization. Every single one of them traceable to internal user IDs." Evelyn leaned forward trying to see, but I gently turned the folder back toward the lawyer. "You'll want to read those in order," I told him. On page 3, the log entries got more detailed. IP addresses, machine names, even the geolocation of the access points. Each one lined up perfectly with Pinnacle's own offices. It was like finding fingerprints at the scene of a crime, except these fingerprints were digital, and there were hundreds of them. Marcus didn't ask to see the pages. He just sat back, eyes fixed on the lawyer's face, waiting for the verdict he already knew was coming. "How long do these logs go on?" the lawyer asked quietly. "From the day after my termination," I said, "right up to last week." The air in the room shifted. It was no longer about a clause in a contract. This was proof. Cold, hard, and admissible in any courtroom they could name. I let the silence stretch, the weight of those pages settling over the table. Finally, I leaned forward just enough to meet Marcus's eyes. "Now," I said, "we can talk about options." Evelyn's pen slipped from her hand, clattering onto the polished wood. The sound was small, but in that moment, it felt like the starting gun for what came next. I reached into my bag one more time and placed 2 identical white envelopes on the table. I slid them forward until they sat exactly halfway between me and Marcus. "These," I said, "are your choices." Evelyn gave a short, dismissive laugh, the kind people use when they're trying to sound in control. She stopped laughing when I opened the first envelope. "Option A," I began. "You hire me back as an external consultant at $1,000 an hour, minimum of 250 billable hours. You issue a written apology to each affected client, publicly, and you stop using Beacon immediately unless a new license is negotiated." Marcus didn't move. Evelyn shifted in her seat. I tapped the second envelope. Option B. You pay out a full buyout under Section 17B plus triple damages for willful infringement plus all legal fees. The amount is calculated here, I slid the paper toward them, and it's payable in full by 5 p.m. today. The lawyer pulled the paper closer. His eyes scanned the figure, and his expression didn't change, but the pause before he set it down told me everything. "That number," I added quietly, "isn't negotiable. And you know it's cheaper than going to court. If we go that route, I'll also be contacting every client under those clauses before the end of the week." The clock on the wall ticked softly, each second stretching longer. Marcus leaned back in his chair, folding his hands under his chin. Evelyn was staring at the envelopes like they were live grenades. "You have until 5 o'clock," I said, standing. "After that, the only conversation will be between our lawyers." I gathered my binder, slid my pen into my bag, and walked toward the door. Halfway there, I stopped, turned slightly, and left them with one last line. "Choose carefully, because this is the only time I'll give you a choice." The rest of that day moved slower than I expected. I worked from my apartment, not touching anything related to Pinnacle. No calls, no follow-up emails, just letting the deadline breathe. The clock on my kitchen wall seemed louder than usual, each tick pushing them closer to 5 o'clock. At 4:42 p.m., my phone buzzed. A single notification lit up the screen. "Incoming wire transfer, funds available." I opened it. The amount was exact, down to the last cent, matching the figure in option B. My eyes lingered on the numbers, not because I doubted them, but because of what they represented. It wasn't about the money. It was about the fact that they'd chosen silence over a fight. That somewhere in that boardroom, after hours of whispered arguments and glances at the clock, they'd realized they had no leverage left. I imagined Evelyn still insisting they could find a workaround, right up until the lawyer reminded her what willful infringement meant in court. I imagined Marcus staring at the contract one last time before signing off on the transfer. No apology, no dramatic phone call, just a wire. Clean, efficient, final. I set the phone down and let out a slow breath. The hum of the city outside my window felt different now, like background music to the closing scene of a chapter I'd been writing for years. Part of me wanted to call someone and celebrate. The other part just wanted quiet. Because even when you win, there's a weight to knowing how close they came to erasing you. I poured myself a drink, sat by the window, and watched the lights along the river flicker one by one. They thought this was the end, but for me, it was just the start of something else entirely. The wire cleared. My account balance looked different now, but the real change wasn't in the numbers. It was in me. Pinnacle kept Beacon running, but under a brand new license they had to pay for. Evelyn kept her title, though I heard from friends inside that her voice wasn't quite as sharp in meetings anymore. Marcus learned the value of reading every page of a contract. As for me, I didn't rush to jump into another corporate role. I took a breath. I spent time deciding where I wanted to invest my energy next, somewhere that saw people as more than replaceable assets. Because here's what I realized. Skills can be replicated, job titles can be handed to someone else, but the relationships you build, the trust you earn, and the integrity you bring to your work, those things can't be swapped out like a spare part. People like Evelyn measure worth in short-term gains and quarterly reports. But in the long run, it's the human connections, the early morning calls, the late-night problem-solving, the quiet understanding between you and the people you serve that keep a company afloat. I didn't set out to win against them. I set out to protect what I built, to make sure the value of that work was recognized, even if it meant forcing them to see it the hard way. And maybe that's the real takeaway. Protect your worth, even when others try to define it for you. Because one day, you might need to remind them, not with a speech, but with proof they can't ignore. What about you? Have you ever had to fight to make someone see your value? I'd love to hear your story. You never know who it might inspire.